Hey guys, the Tarisland global beta is coming to a close, so I wanted to share some thoughts on my experience and also make a few predictions about this game going forward, so let's jump into it. At this point in my life, I only have so many hours I can put towards gaming. I don't want a second job experience. I don't want something that's going to add stress to me. I want a game that is a fun experience, that's relaxing, and that is rewarding. And well, I gotta say, I think Tarisland delivers on that. And I want to talk about some of the positives, the negatives, and do I think this game at launch has a chance to crack my gaming rotation? Well, let's find out. Today, when you pull up Twitch and you look at the top 10, you're gonna see games like League of Legends, Valorant, CSGO, all games that are easy to pick up, easy to understand, but also rewarding. You can jump into right away. There's no grind. And whether you think so or not, MMOs are competing with these type of games, especially for new MMO players. Young players who have a choice of what to play, I don't think they're choosing MMOs like they used to. I think older MMOs have become far too complex. A new player jumping in, and even some of my friends, I can't even imagine getting them into an MMO because of the knowledge required of how to play an MMO or everything that goes with it. Tarisland, however, is a return to simplicity within the MMO genre. Tarisland adopts a League of Legends style action bar. I think you might have like 6 abilities and a couple ultimates. It's just very easy to understand. I jumped into the game and immediately it was intuitive. I have a handful of abilities. I have a healing potion. I have an ultimate. I was able to experience the game without being overwhelmed with the amount of abilities I needed. If you don't like some of the skills on your bar, simply just go into the passive skill tree, and in the passives, you can change the way abilities interact with one another or transform an ability to work differently. And I think they've done a really smart thing here by putting the complexity in the skill tree rather than giving you 37 buttons to push. And I just really like this philosophy. Another thing, gearing is incredibly straightforward. You run a dungeon, you get a piece of loot at the end of the dungeon. It could be a weapon or an armor piece. As you play the dungeons, you also get a dungeon currency. Take the currency to the vendor, fill in the pieces that you're not getting from drops. You get all the drops from that dungeon, you move to the next dungeon. You increase your gear even more, you move to the next dungeon, until you get an eye level high enough to jump in the first raid, so on and so forth. It's very straightforward, a throwback to old school MMO gearing. You run the dungeon, you get the armor to run the better dungeon, the raid, and so on. It just makes a lot of sense. It simplifies everything in the day of MMOs now, where you need 500 currencies to buy things or to craft things for your gear. It's just a good philosophy, a nice touch, and I appreciate that. Now let's get into what I think is the absolute best feature of Tarisland, and that is the instanced PVE content. The dungeons and raids are so incredibly fun, and there's a couple reasons for that. First off is the combat is actually fun to play. Only having 6 to 8 abilities, it actually does an amazing thing. Instead of looking at your bar the whole time, your head is up, you're looking at the boss, you're looking at the mechanics, you're looking at what the other players are doing. So you take in this full experience in the dungeon, and it makes it really immersive and fun. And the other thing is the dungeons are beautiful. The character models are good. It is a stylized type of graphics, which I personally like. The bosses look good. The mechanics are telegraphed well, so you have the ability to succeed in the dungeon if you're paying attention. It just makes for an overall great experience. You can run these dungeons as much as you want without a lockout until you get to the raids. If you are a dungeon player in other MMOs, I think you're really gonna like this and you're gonna be into this. It's also incredibly easy to group up. The matchmaking system is good, and they even have an in-game voice chat feature, so you can chat with other people in the dungeon or a raid. If there's an incredibly hard mechanic, you can chat with one another, figure it out, and it's just another convenience, a nice touch that they've added to the instance PvE system. Another cool thing about the raids especially, they have a page dedicated to each boss, and it gives you a full rundown on all the mechanics and what needs to be done to beat the boss. They actually have a guide to the boss in the game, which is kind of crazy. but it just makes a lot of sense. You don't have to leave the game to figure out how to beat the content. That doesn't ensure that you're going to execute on all those things that it's telling you to do, but it's just a nice feature, especially when you have an elite mode in the game, which they do, which is a harder difficulty. Overall, well done Tarisland on the dungeon and raid content, and I think people are going to really like it. So let's stick to the theme of instanced content. I'm a huge PvPer in all the MMOs I play. So how is the PvP? Well, I gotta say this was my first big disappointment in Tarisland. I was not a huge fan of the PvP. I do want to say I think a lot of their ideas are good ideas. I think if they can continue to polish the PvP system, that it could turn around and be something good. Do I ever think it's going to be as good as the dungeons and raids? I don't quite think so. I think other games are going to just do PvP better than Tarisland does. But let's talk about what they are doing. So one of the battlegrounds, for example, was a Overwatch style move the payload from one end of the map to the other. And the way you did that is you of course had to stand by the payload and move it. There was cannons in the middle that the opposing team would repair, and the cannons would shoot down on your payload, and if it destroys your payload, you lose. And your payload would pretty much get destroyed in every single match because the cannons were so OP. So by the end of the beta, people figured out the best way to win was actually not to progress your payload, just to keep it in your home instance and not let it get destroyed. Because even if you progressed it further than the other team, if the other teams did not get destroyed, they would win. They just need some more tuning and love and care for these PvP game modes. The other thing, of course, which I know a lot of players don't like, is the tanks are really overpowered in PvP and they're almost unkillable. I don't enjoy tanks in PvP. I didn't like that. Obviously, you had a wide range of levels playing against each other, so maybe a way to bracket certain level of players together in the PvP ladder would be nice. I personally like a system like Guild Wars 2 where everything is normalized in PvP. So if you go in at level 2 or at max level, you're boosted to max, everyone's equal, the best man wins. That's what I really like. I hope they go in that direction. I don't think they will. The last thing that really bothered me about PvP in the beta is you could only play at certain times. And I've played games like this before, like Arcade, where certain PvP game modes were only available at certain times of the day or on weekends. That's really frustrating. And I'm hoping this was just a beta feature, but we'll have to wait and see what they do on launch with that. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is actually the world content. I think if you're an enjoyer of world content, like a Guild Wars 2 open player or a WoW player who really likes to do world quests or puzzle quests or things like that, I think Tarisland is going to give you some nice features and quality of life that you're really going to like. But the one thing you need for world content to be good is the world has to be good. And I gotta say, the world in Tarisland is absolutely beautiful. I found myself just wanting to explore, not necessarily looking for anything, but just to see more of the world. And so I could see myself spending time in the world content just to be immersed in that world. Now, what type of world content do they have? They have your normal questing, world quests, very WoW-esque, as you might assume, in the world quest style and what is offered. They also have world bosses, which were really cool. You get amazing gear from the world bosses, which is nice. On par for sure with the dungeon gear. So if you're an open world player and you want good gear, world bosses could be an avenue for you to do that. And one of the cool quality of life features with the world content is when you open your world map, it lists everything on the map already for you. And if you want to get to that content quickly, you just double click on the icon and it takes you to that area. I thought this was a really nice touch. Me as an MMO vet, I found myself doing it the old-fashioned way, getting on my mount and just checking out the world, exploring things, and I had a really good time. We've been going back and forth here, and unfortunately we have to go to another negative. And this is a really big one, and this is going to turn a lot of players off from this game, and that is the story. I didn't really find anything compelling about the story. It seemed to just be one fantasy MMO trope after another, and so nothing engaging, nothing that grabbed me or pulled me in. I think if you play games for story, you're going to stick to FF or WoW or Guild Wars or Star Wars Old Republic. Any of those games are going to give you more than what Tarisland is going to give you in regards to story. I think the other thing that really took me out of the story is the localization. This game is made by a Chinese developer. Some of the quest text just didn't make sense. It was really hard to read sometimes, and that really takes you out of a good story. The other thing is, of course, the voice acting, and it's a little comical. It mainly sounds like Chinese voice actors who are trying to deliver lines in English when English is not their first language. So just for me, I couldn't get into it, and I don't think it's going to be a selling point. So for me, I'm just going to have to pass on the story. It's not engaging. I don't think it's going to bring new players in and really grab them. Now, is the questing okay? I found myself wanting to do side quests more because there was less voice acting, but it still allowed me to explore a world that was really beautiful. So that is kind of what I gravitated to. But at this point, I almost wish they would just take this story out. Just give us an MMO with end game, world content, PVE Instanced Content, PvP, you know, the raids. Do we really need the story to get the fun stuff? I don't know. Maybe we do. So overall, what can I say about my time in the Tarisland global beta? It was just a lot of fun. The simplicity of Tarisland is a huge strength. You jump in and from the get-go, you know what's going on. The controls feel intuitive. The action bar is limited, so you're not overwhelmed with abilities. It's just a really good experience to get started in. And if you're an instanced PvE player, if you love dungeons and raids, you're gonna have a lot of fun with this game. They just made the dungeons and raids incredibly fun, rewarding, and the best thing about it is with the limited action bar, you actually get to look and see what's going on in the raid instead of watching a health bar or a buff bar. It's just a really good experience. The other great feature to Tarisland is just the world itself. The world is absolutely beautiful. If you're a fan of world content, you're gonna love going out and doing world quests. You're gonna do side quests. You're gonna do puzzles. You want to go take out the world bosses and get good gear. And if that's the player you are, I think you're gonna have fun in this game world. However, if you're a PvPer or if you play MMOs for the story or the rich lore behind it, I don't think this is gonna be the one for you. Hopefully they'll make some improvements before launch, but it's not looking good since this is already in the beta phase. With all that being said, all I know is that I had a fun and engaging experience with Tarisland, and I look forward to this game on launch. Can it crack my game rotation? I think I am gonna check it out to see what improvements they can make. Is this the WoW killer? Of course not. It may be more like WoW's little brother. I don't know. I think there's room for this game, and I think a lot of MMO players are gonna like a lot of the features of this game, and I think it has a future. So let's stay tuned to what Tarisland does, and I'll bring you guys more content and news about what they're doing in the development process as we lead up to the launch. Thanks for joining me, guys. Give me a like, subscribe if you appreciate this style of video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.